Hello, incurable creators, and welcome to the Podcasting Secret Show. I'm Nathan William, your host, and today I'm joined by Jason Fitzgerald. Jason is the CEO of Strength Running. He's a certified running coach. He is an amazing athlete who's done a marathon, for example, in 2 hours and 39 minutes. And he also is the host of the Strength Running podcast. Welcome to the Podcasting Secret Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan William. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jason.
Nathan, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Jason, can you just start off by sharing with us a little bit about yourself personally, outside of your podcast and outside of running?
Outside of running, outside of my podcast, sure. That is hard. I am often just running and doing work, but the other big part of me is that I'm a dad. I have 3 kids, 11, 9, and 7. And so I'm one of those people balancing my athletic pursuits with my business goals and also raising 3 kids and dealing with all of that. So I was someone who was a competitive runner for a very long time, up until about maybe 2015. But I've sort of gotten into some other things since then. I do a little bit more cycling. I do more weightlifting and hiking these days as well, but I am running 6 or 7 days a week.
Yeah. Have you tried triathlons?
I have tried triathlon. When I graduated college in 2006, I dabbled in some sprint triathlons. I've always loved cycling. I realized very quickly, though, that I am a very cliche runner. I sink to the bottom of any lake or pool that I'm in. I'm not the best swimmer, and I don't really enjoy it. You know, I used to do this triathlon every Memorial Day with my family. And I realized 3 years in that not only do they have a triathlon, they have a duathlon, which is a run, bike, run, which is perfect for a guy like me. And I was livid with my family that they knew this and never told me.
Yeah. So I'm not an athlete like you, but I did lots of running growing up, the 2 mile was my event in track, and did some triathlons, sprint triathlons like you. And the running, the long distance running sure took a toll on my body. I've had to have some discs replaced and such as a result of that impact. And I enjoy the triathlons because it breaks it up, right? It's not just my body doing one thing quite as long. So
yeah, it's very similar to trail running. I enjoy trail running because it breaks it up a little bit. You're not so worried about your exact paces when you're out there, and you're just having fun, enjoying the woods and the mountains where I am here in Colorado.
Yeah, I agree. Trail running is absolutely the best form of running. Running around that track 8 times to do the 2 mile is pretty mind numbing. And then a treadmill is even worse.
Which is why I never ran an outdoor track 10K. 25 laps on the outdoor track, just not for me.
No, that would be painful. When I did the 2 mile competitively, I felt like I had to switch my brain off. You know, it's hard to just do that same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. You need a well-developed track brain to really handle that.
Okay, so tell me about your journey to become a runner.
So I became a runner almost by accident. I was someone in middle school who really enjoyed track and field week because I got to do the high jump, which was hilarious because I was like 4'11" in 8th grade doing the high jump, but I actually was decent at it. And when I went into high school, I wanted to do a fall sport, cross country. I had never heard of it, but my family told me, hey, it's like track. So I showed up to the first day of practice in long basketball shorts, basketball shoes, thinking that I was going to high jump. And the next thing I know, we're all just running every day, and that's all we do. But I was very fortunate to have a great group of guys on the cross country team that made it very welcoming and fun. Plus, the coach was just a good guy. And I stuck with it long enough to start seeing a little bit of progress. And I think any runner will recognize that when you start to see progress, and this is probably true for anything, this is probably true for podcasting and seeing your downloads increase, you get more and more excited. And so I started getting more into the sport when I started seeing all this improvement. And I sort of got hooked just inadvertently by trying this new sport. And then I did 3 seasons throughout high school. I did, cross country, indoor and outdoor track for all 4 years in college, and then trained post collegiately. So it really became a big part of my identity. And I don't think I'd have it any other way.
Yeah. So when we did the pre-interview, you said you're not an elite athlete, but you were a collegiate runner. You made the varsity team, and I just looked it up. What percentage of runners can run a 2:39 marathon? And it's less than 0.5%. So
Wow.
yeah, you're in a pretty elite group.
I also wish that I had run that marathon with the new super shoes. I didn't have that technology back in 2011. So,
Yeah.
hey, maybe I'm really like a 202 guy.
Tell me about those super shoes. What makes those shoes so much better?
Basically, two things. Number one, there's a lot of this new age foam that absorbs and releases more energy. So it acts a little bit more like a spring. It's just bouncier. So you're going to get more energy return from the shoes. And the other thing that literally is a spring is that they put these carbon plates in the super shoes now. And so when it compresses, it bounces back a little bit and it gives you a little bit more energy return. So for a lot of runners, you might get an extra 2, 3, 4% of extra efficiency when you're wearing super shoes. So in a race like a marathon, over many hours, you're going to be running substantially faster by the time you hit that finish line.
Interesting. And there's no restrictions against the super shoes.
There is a certain stack height that you have to be under. So in other words, you can't wear shoes that are too high off the ground. If the sole of the shoe is too thick, they deem that an illegal shoe for competition. So Sure, you can use it in training, but you would be disqualified from, a kind of a real certified race if you were to try to run in those kinds of illegal shoes.
Okay. And what is the best super shoe that you would recommend for those of us that aren't quite as elite as you?
Oh, there's so many out there, and a lot of them are great. So I would just say just try a couple of them. Nike has the Alpha Fly, the Vapor Fly. I'm currently running in the Saucony super shoe, which I'm really enjoying. I tried the Hoka super shoe, which I believe is the Cielo, and I didn't love that shoe, but some people do. And it really just kind of depends on how you run, your mechanics, and what your body best responds to.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you've told us about your journey to become a runner. Can you tell us about your journey to become a podcaster and how those two relate?
Well, they're actually quite similar in that I never really wanted to become a runner, and I certainly never wanted to become a podcaster. I was convinced to do both. In 2016, when I launched my podcast, I had already started a blog. I had a YouTube channel. I had social media profiles. I just wasn't sure that another platform to contribute content to was something I really wanted to do. But I'm incredibly glad that I did, because it ended up being not only really impactful for my overall business, but it's ended up being one of the most fun parts of my business. I just love having interesting conversations with physical therapists and sports psychologists and performance experts and all the people that an elite runner might surround themselves with to help them get to that world-class level. I try to bring those people to the average runner and just have these interesting training discussions to help bring some of these best practices to, the adult recreational runner. And that to me is fascinating. I just have so much fun talking about training theory and exercise physiology and those kinds of topics. So I'm very glad that I did it. But it's funny, it was not something that I initially intended to do. I realized I had to be sort of cajoled into it by a friend of mine. But once I did it, I was like, this is fantastic. I think the networking opportunities that a podcast provides you is also really interesting and a great reason to really love the platform. Because when else do you get to have long form, in-depth conversations with people that probably you wouldn't be able to if you didn't host these kinds of conversations.
And you don't even have to pay for it. It's almost like getting an MBA in your specific niche to be able to do a podcast.
Oh, sure. The other part of it is just almost professional development that I've experienced, over the last 8.5, 9 years. I've talked to close to 400 subject matter experts and
Yeah.
prepared for those conversations. And in doing that, yeah, it's been incredibly helpful for me as a running coach and as someone who considers themselves an educator in the running space, helping runners understand certain topics and apply them to their, personal situations. I don't think I could do that as effectively if I didn't have the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot of people they almost feel like imposters when they start their podcast because they don't know enough. They don't feel like they're an expert in the space. But if they just will stick with it, do it for a year, put in the first 100 episodes, they will have gained so much subject level expertise that they will turn into an expert in the space.
That is exactly Mr. Beast's YouTube advice, which is when someone wants to pick his brain about YouTube, he says, stop, make 100 videos first, and then we'll talk. Now, the real secret here is that after you get to 100 videos, you don't have any questions because you're the expert.
Figured it out. You had a business before you did the podcast. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
And tell me a little bit more about your business and how your podcast has impacted your business.
Yeah, so strength running was initially started as a blog. I thought my strength was as a writer. So I did a lot of writing, really focused on my website. I focused on writing articles that were helpful, but also indexed by the search engines and building my email newsletter. And so at the beginning, my business was a lot of writing. And I feel like that helped clarify my thoughts on a lot of topics within the running space. And so it just allowed me to be able to better speak about those topics once I did start the podcast. But, my business existed for, let's see, about 6 years or 6.5 years before I started the podcast. And it was mostly fueled by YouTube and search engine results. And what the podcast did was create a new way for my audience to interact with my content. And I think, generally speaking, what a podcast is really good at is developing a better relationship with your audience because it's more intimate. You're in their ear. You get to hang out with them when they're commuting to work or they're doing chores or they're out for a run or doing a strength workout.
That's right.
Wherever they might be listening, you're there right with them and you're sharing this kind of intimate moment with them. And it's very different than, say, an article, which most people just skim, or even a video where not as many people actually watch it or they'll watch just a part of it. And so a podcast, I think, is really helpful at building that relationship with your audience, building trust. But on the other side of it too is it's another platform that you can monetize. And so I've been able to strike up partnerships with different brands that I think are doing really good work in the running space. And so it's also provided an additional revenue stream as well as almost this top of the funnel discovery tool for my training programs and my coaching services.
Yeah. To go back real quick, and discuss this point that you made about podcast advertising, where you have the kind of this captive audience. When they're in front of a television and an ad comes up, we skip those ads if we can. When you're running or you're driving in a car, it's really hard to skip those ads. So the ads get listened to and consumed a lot more than many of the other mediums where they're ignored.
Yeah, for sure. The other great thing about podcasting that is different from, say, the radio or TV is that those ads live on in perpetuity. And there's definitely a long tail of listenership of podcast episodes. So I can go into my analytics software right now and just be like, oh, this episode I published a year ago got 200 listens last month. That's really interesting. Yeah. And it also means for the advertiser that there really is no expiration date for the offer that is included in their ad, and they're going to benefit from that long tail ad exposure for theoretically years and years.
Yeah. Okay. So how have you monetized your podcast?
I think in two main ways. I mean, number one, it's pushing people to my email list where I can talk more about my training programs. And so it has been a great discovery tool for my training programs and my coaching services. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, a lot of people would email me and they'd say, "Hey, I love your blog. Can I hire you as a coach?" Or "I have a question about this training program." These days it's, "Hey, I love your podcast," and, blah, blah, blah. So it's very interesting. Like, the number one way that most runners probably engage with strength running or, discover me as a coach is probably through the podcast. So it's been really helpful for sort of the back end of the business, the real revenue generator, which is the training programs, courses, coaching services. But then, of course, you can monetize the podcast itself with brand advertisers. And I've done this a couple different ways, using, a little bit of like a CPM model where you have a blanket price to advertise on the podcast. And that includes to host read ad reads, things like that. Or you can use an affiliate model where you're giving out a discount code and you're only being paid for any sales that you might refer. And I've used both options. I think they're great depending on, what you're intending to do. But it just goes to show there's a lot of different ways to monetize a podcast. It's not just through ads. Just think you have a captive audience. So you can kind of do what you will with that audience.
Today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is brought to you by Pod Allies, the done-for-you podcasting services solution. When I speak with CEOs about their podcast, one of the most common comments that I hear is that they know they need a podcast, but they don't have time. Have you ever wondered how some businesses find a way to still run their podcasts while juggling their crazy day-to-day operations? The secret might be simpler than you think. Let me introduce you to Pod Allies. This is a service that's changed the game for businesses in the podcasting world. Pod Allies is a done-for-you podcast production and marketing service. They understand that while many businesses understand the immense value podcasting can have for their business, finding time to produce, syndicate, promote, and monetize a show can be challenging. Pod Allies offers a dedicated team to handle virtually all aspects of your podcast production. From strategy and branding to audio and video editing and guest scheduling, they've got you covered. They even take care of creating blog posts, transcripts, and syndicating your content across multiple platforms. What sets Pod Allies apart is their use of PodUp, their proprietary podcasting software suite. This allows them to streamline the entire podcasting process, saving you time, effort, and a bunch of money. If you're ready to become a thought leader, connect with your audience, and grow your business through podcasting without all of the investment of time and cost of doing it yourself, Pod Allies might be the perfect solution for you. To learn more or to schedule a free consultation with a podcast expert, visit podallies.com. That's podallies.com. Now back to the show. What are your best secrets and strategies for growing your podcast?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. First, with the understanding that I don't know if there's any secrets. Tell me, Nathan. I need to know your secrets. I do think podcasting is a tough place to grow. There's not a lot of really great discovery engines for podcasting, and hopefully that's changing. I think Spotify is doing some work with better recommendations. Where when you think of an SEO optimized blog, or a YouTube channel, or even social media, these are much more highly discoverable because you're working more with algorithms. You're working more with, groups of people searching for very specific terms in search engines. Whereas with podcasting, that doesn't really exist. And so it is tricky to grow a podcast. But a couple of things that I've found to work the best is, number one, you grow on social media and then you funnel that audience to your podcast. So try to grow on social media at the same time that you're podcasting. Now, you don't want to just be doing podcast related content on your social media channels. You want to be native to those platforms, but nevertheless, grow on social media, funnel that audience to your podcast. A little bit more tactically, I've found that one of the things that works really well for podcasting is a great title. It's really important to have a really good title. And if you title your podcast really well, I mean, I've personally seen episodes get 20% more downloads because I've used a little bit of a clickbaity title. And, my approach is I'm going to, a little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. I think if my content is if we're talking about the exercise physiology of lactate and how that relates to your zone 2 training zone, my God, Nathan, that's a little dry. And I try to put some humor into the episodes. I try to make the title a little bit more interesting, a little bit have more of a hook. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important. And I think the last thing is using video for your podcast, even if you don't have an in-person show, cutting clips of your guest, putting those clips on, say, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, because those can get a lot more views than, say, even your podcast episode is getting downloads. And that's going to funnel people to your podcast as well. So I do think video is going to be increasingly a big part of any podcaster's growth toolbox moving forward. But it is admittedly a tricky platform to grow. And let me tell you one example of what I thought would help my podcast grow, but that never did. I've had some really big names on the Strength Running podcast, and they've never helped that episode get more downloads. So I have had, Olympians and, Boston Marathon winners on my, well, maybe not winners, but, some of the biggest names in the sport of running, and, they don't really drive a lot of listens. So that is an interesting thing. I think you need almost like a household name or a celebrity that is going to really bring incredible awareness to your show. But for the most part, it's not as helpful as I thought it was.
Yeah. Do you put the name of that famous runner in your title? Are you SEO optimizing around their name?
Yes, I think if you do interview someone who has a big following themselves, they might have some name recognition. Yeah, it's a good idea to put their name in the title.
Yeah. And then you're reaching out to them and inviting them to share the episode out to their following. I'm sure you're doing that as well.
Yeah, depending on the guest, some guests are like, nope, not doing any of that.
Yeah.
And sure, you sort of have to just accept that.
Yeah.
But some guests are really great. They'll collaborate with you on Reels, on Instagram. They'll email the episode out to their email list. And so, maybe an under-recognized growth strategy is finding the guest who is not necessarily as famous as a potential guest you could find, but really finding the guest that has an audience that they're willing to promote the podcast to. And you can sort of see through their social media behavior, et cetera, if you're studying how they do things, and find these guests that are willing to do that. Because, you could have a big name person on your podcast, and if they never talk about it, it's not quite as helpful as someone who's a lot smaller, but they're promoting your show themselves over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. So maybe not the top level influencer, maybe an influencer that's a tier down, but is hungry enough and will help you and invite you on their show and do things back that the top level celebrities won't.
I think it's also helpful just to think creatively on how you can drive awareness of your podcast. So let me share a quick tactic that I once used. I interviewed my college cross-country coach. And once I interviewed him, I emailed the media director for the college, and they linked to it from the website. And so I got a link to my website from a .edu domain name.
Huge SEO value.
Which has incredible SEO value. So you kind of just have to be a little bit scrappy and creative with thinking about ways to grow your audience, grow your reach. It's not always about more content. It's about, how do I create this content and then figure out some creative ways to get it out there to the world?
Yeah. What is one of the most challenging things that you've been through as a podcaster, and how'd you get through it?
Yeah, I mean, I admittedly have not experienced too many enormous challenges. I think one of the challenges is growth. It's a business where, I've talked to a lot of running podcasters. There's a lot of stagnation in the number of downloads that running podcasters are getting in the last year or so. And so that's been a challenge, trying to think about ways to grow the listenership of the podcast. And then I've just made, all kinds of beginner, novice, amateur mistakes on the podcast that, hopefully just goes to show you can have one of the most popular shows in your category and still make completely junior varsity mistakes.
Yeah.
Like I once recorded an episode with Olympian Nick Symmonds. He was one of America's fastest 800-meter runners, all kinds of awards. And I did not properly record the episode. And so I had absolutely no audio after an hour of talking to this guy. And I had to just go groveling back to him, beg him to re-record the episode. So there's a lot of those small problems with podcasting, little technical difficulties, something like, oh, my microphone wasn't actually plugged in. And so I only got audio from my computer, which is not nearly as high quality. A lot of the times my advice to up and coming podcasters is do not let perfection become the enemy of good enough. Let's just get the episode out. You've got to get your reps in. And this pursuit of perfection is often what causes people to throw up the towel. I don't want to do this anymore. It has to be perfect when it really doesn't.
Yeah. And when it's perfect, it's often perceived as inauthentic and it's not connectable and relatable. And I was reading an article today about one of the biggest ways businesses are trying to combat AI is they're strategically adding imperfection into their content to differentiate themselves from AI. So it's okay. It's not necessarily a great thing to always be perfect.
That reminds me too, a lot of the video ads that are now being published by big brands almost look like they're being filmed like, with your cell phone, kind of like a selfie view. And they look like an amateur made them. They kind of have this feel
on purpose.
It's very authentic. Like, hey, I just pulled out my camera and I need to show you this thing right now. Like it's this breaking news sort of, behind the scenes thing. And it's of course all staged and scripted out, but the vibe of it is this is not created by an ad agency. This is not, filmed in a studio somewhere. This is an influencer out in the real world, just kind of making this kind of imperfect video. And that's what's converting better.
Yeah, that's right. There's a concept called the YouTube effect where 96% of people don't trust ads. They don't trust what a business says about themselves. And so if a business creates this perfect video with perfect actors and perfect lighting and perfect audio and whatever, perfect makeup, it looks like an ad. It looks like the voice is the company and it's not trusted. And so businesses are trying, like you were saying, to create videos that look like they were not created in the studio and try to gain that credibility back that they've been losing.
Yeah, it's a complete 180 from where we were maybe 30 years ago. I'm a creature of the 90s and early 2000s because that's just when I grew up and everything was perfect back then. And that's before the internet sort of democratized everything.
Yeah. Talk to me about more traditional media, like in your space at Runner's World and Men's Health and those types of publications. How have you been able to leverage those to be able to grow and promote what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think I was really interested in those kinds of publications a little bit earlier in my career for two important reasons. Number one, I wanted the credibility of being published in those authoritative publications. So to be able to say, I've written for Runner's World and I've been quoted in the Washington Post and New York Times, that sounds pretty cool. And it gives me a certain level of authority. The other advantage of trying to get some of this kind of mainstream press is that it's almost always digital. Like I don't care if I'm in a print New York Times story. It is almost irrelevant to me. I really want to be on their website because I want a link from their site back to my website. And so there's the credibility portion of it. And there's also the search engine optimization part of it where I want the link from that .edu website. I want a link from the Washington Post or the New York Times or Men's Health or Shape Magazine or whatever it might be, because these are large media properties. They have a high domain rank and they're going to provide your website with a lot of credibility, quote unquote, search engine juice. And it's really going to help your business rank better. So if you are building a website that has content that you are trying to rank highly in search engines, getting that kind of press is really important. Now, usually they're just going to link back to the homepage of your site. They're not going to link back to an individual piece of content with the exact keyword that you really want them to. So one of the things that I was able to do earlier in my career was almost become a freelance writer too. So I have written for active.com. I have written for Podium Runner, which was previously Competitor Magazine, which then became Trail Runner Magazine, which was then wrapped up into Outside. And I had writing opportunities for all of those platforms. And I was able to link back to my website almost at will and include the keywords that I really wanted to. And so this to me is like, three prizes for the price of one. I get the credibility of writing for Runner's World. I get the search engine juice from writing the article and linking back to my website. And I'm also being paid to write the article as well. So it's a really great opportunity to improve all of those things if they match the goals of your business.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good marketing strategy for you. Okay, if you went back and were giving advice to your past self when you were starting your podcast, what is the most important secret you would share with yourself?
I think I would have leaned more heavily into video back then. I didn't really do any video for years at the beginning of my podcast. And it's not that I think it would have dramatically, well, I do think it would have dramatically helped the podcast, but it's almost a function of YouTube that I have this piece of advice for my younger self, because it was easier to grow on YouTube 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And when I started the podcast in 2016, there were better opportunities to basically go viral on YouTube that I should have been taking advantage of, that would have had amazing spillover effect for my podcast. So I guess my advice is, where are the current viral opportunities and how can you really go hard at those? Because right now it's really hard to grow with even search engine marketing, because a lot of people are now starting to use ChatGPT and AI instead of search engines. And that whole landscape is really changing. But I would be looking at Instagram. I would be looking at TikTok. I would be looking at YouTube and really trying to figure out, how can I grow there so that I can grow on the podcast?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Great strategy. Okay, Jason, thank you for being a guest on the show today. If our audience has enjoyed this episode like I have, and they want to learn more about you and your services and your show, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Definitely check out strengthrunning.com. That is our home base. You can learn more about the Strength Running podcast, the Strength Running YouTube channel as well, and all the different training programs and content we have on the website as well.
That was some good advice. I liked how you got into the monetization stuff. I loved how you got into the PR stuff. I think that was the best tip you gave, is to find the local publication, the niche publications, and write for them and get cross links for you. And that was a really good strategy you shared.
Another strategy I used to do was I would interview the race director of a major race on what's going on this year. Tell me about the course. What's your strategy for how to race this course? And then I would ask them to share it on social media, maybe include it in their email newsletter. So I'm trying to provide something for any attendee or race registrant, some kind of valuable insight into the race that they're about to run. And then hopefully the race director or their marketing team can do something with that to help those runners, but also help my podcast.
That is a really good strategy. Thank you very much for sharing. Anything else? Any other strategies? Any other stories that you can think of you'd want to share?
I'm a YouTuber as well. And so one of the things that I try to do is simply mention the podcast in most of my videos, or even create a video where I'm going to teach you 5 interesting things I've learned from interviewing elite runners. And it's a video, but it's really based on the podcast.
Right.
And I think that is not only a valuable video because it's distilling some of these higher level lessons from these long form conversations, but anyone who's listening to that is really getting kind of hit over the head with the fact that this guy has a podcast. He interviews all these elite runners. They share things about their training and lessons they've learned. If I like this video, I'm probably going to like his podcast. So I should check that out.
Okay. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Jason. I'd love to reciprocate. If there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know.
Well, thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite. I had a good time.